John Ratcliffe, former CIA director, addresses FBI Director Christopher Wray during a hearing.
Director Wray, good to see you. Thanks for being here. I originally intended to talk to you about the encryption issue today, but given where this hearing started and where I think it's going as it relates to the issue of FISA abuse, I'm going to ask you about this. I want to give you an opportunity to hopefully answer these questions once and for all so that the rest of your testimony can be properly directed. It seems like some of my Democratic colleagues, because this FISA process was initiated during the Obama administration, that they want to focus on the fact that there was no abuse of the FISA process or that that abuse was not politically motivated. It started with Chairman Nadler. The very first question to you was trying to establish that the Inspector General found no evidence of political motive or bias against the president, and you responded that the Inspector General's report speaks for itself. So does the Inspector General. And Inspector General Horowitz on December 11th before the Senate Judiciary Committee said this, quote, "On the FISA side, we found, as you noted, a lack of documentary or testimonial evidence about intentionality, but we also noted the lack of satisfactory explanations and, in fact, leave open the possibility that for the reasons you indicated, it is unclear what the motivations were. On the one hand, gross incompetence, negligence. On the other hand, intentionality, and everywhere in between," end quote. Just because no FBI agent tells the Inspector General, "I admit I'm biased and politically motivated against President Trump," doesn't mean there isn't overwhelming evidence of bias and political motivation in the record. To use just one example, an FBI lawyer involved intimately in this FISA process against a Trump campaign associate, Carter Page, sent a number of texts in and around the election of President Trump. Here are a few of them. "The crazies finally won." Another one. "This is the Tea Party on steroids." Another one. "Pence is stupid." Another text that he sent. "I just can't imagine the systematic disassembly of the process, the progress we've made over the last 8 years. And finally, when asked whether he intended to keep working during the Trump administration, he said, quote, "Viva la resistance." Regardless of what that FBI lawyer admitted, do you see evidence of political bias or motivation against President Trump in those text messages?
Well, I would just say, Congressman, as I've said before, that I consider the report to have described conduct that I consider unacceptable and unrepresentative of who we are as an institution. I'm not going to comment on specific people's conduct for a variety of reasons, but I will say that political bias has no place in today's FBI.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'm going to ask you to comment on someone's specific conduct, because that very same FBI agent is the one the Inspector General found in his report was the one that tampered with evidence by counterfeiting an email from an intelligence agency to illegally continue surveillance of a Trump campaign associate. That's what happened, right, Director?
Again, I would just refer you to the report.
Well, the report acknowledges that. So does the Department of Justice and the FISA court. They acknowledge that this was illegal surveillance with respect to at least several of these FISA applications because there was not probable cause or proper predication, correct?
Right.
So, to the point of one of my Democratic colleagues that there was no fraud on the court, illegal surveillance and changing evidence to conduct illegal surveillance is the very definition of fraud on the court, is it not?
Well, I certainly think it describes conduct that's utterly unacceptable.
And it's what took place here.
Well, again, I refer to the report. We have accepted, and I've been very clear about this, we've accepted every finding in the Inspector General's report, including some that are extremely painful to us as an institution.
And I appreciate it, Director Wray. I love the FBI. You know my background. I know what you're trying to do. I know the difficult position that you're in. I think the record is clear. I remain convinced that the prior administration weaponized the FBI for political motivation and purposes. I just wonder whether or not you're going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle. I truly know that your motivations are to do that. I wish you the best of luck. I yield back.
Director Wray, it is often the case that it's in a community's worst moment or toughest day that they interact with the FBI. That was certainly the case for my community in Pensacola following the terrorist attack at NAS Pensacola. And I wanted to begin by thanking the FBI and the very talented professionals who brought comfort and competence and a very thorough investigation to that fact pattern. I am confident, based on the work of the FBI in concert with the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security, that on a going forward basis, we'll be able to work with our allies more closely so that there is ongoing, robust review of communications and social media content. I know that investigation is concluded with the press conference that Attorney General Barr had, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to reflect on any lessons learned and any strategies that we might use to ensure that our military communities are safe as we host some of our foreign partners.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for the question, and thank you also for the kind words about our folks who worked very hard on that investigation, also with their military partners, especially NCIS, among others. Certainly, that tragic event highlighted a number of things. One, the importance of making sure that we get adequate information from our foreign partners and that they do the diligence that often they're in the best position to do on the people before they come our way. And I think the Kingdom has indicated an interest in being more engaged on that, and I think that's a healthy and positive sign. Another different lesson learned, though, from that investigation, which ties into a topic that's come up a few times already here this morning, and as the Attorney General commented, I think, very forcefully on, one of the things that the shooter in Pensacola did in the heat of the moment, while people were coming at him and he was coming at them, took the time to shoot one of his own phones to destroy it so that presumably we, law enforcement, wouldn't have access to what's in it. Now, remarkably, the men and women of the FBI in our OTD, our Office of Technology Division, were able to reconstruct that phone as an engineering matter so that we could have access to it from a technical perspective. But because of the way the encryption is on the phone, we don't have meaningful access to the content of that phone. So whatever it is he was trying to prevent us all from seeing, we don't know. And we're currently engaged with Apple, hoping to try to see if we can get better help from them to try to get access to the contents of that phone. But it illustrates why this lawful access issue is such an important one. But I appreciate the question.
And given the fact that recently Al-Qaeda Yemen has taken responsibility for the terrorist attack in my community, it would seem to elevate our need to have access to those communication devices and tools. Apple responds that the government should not be forced to compel them to make a key for a lock that exists. Do you believe that there's meaningful legislation that the Congress should consider so that technology partners have a yellow brick road to work with the government so as to not put burdens on them that could be used by our adversaries, but that in fact could help the FBI with these important investigations that involve these complex issues of international criminal and terrorist organizations?
Well, whether it's done by legislation or done by the companies doing it voluntarily, I think we have to find a solution. This problem is real. It's now. I hear about it from law enforcement from every state in the country all the time. It affects every threat we're contending with. We believe strongly in encryption, as I said to the chairman earlier, but we also believe that law enforcement has to have lawful access to the content of where the information is, or we're not going to be able to protect people. There are some countries that have already passed legislation of the sort that you're referring to, Australia, for example. But one way or another, we've got to figure out a way to solve this problem, or we're all going to wake up one day and realize that law enforcement, the hardworking men and women of law enforcement in Pensacola and everywhere else, are blind. If you were a criminal and you had a choice between doing all of your information and communications in a device that was utterly beyond reach of law enforcement and doing it in one where law enforcement with a warrant could have access, which one would you pick? Of course you'd pick the first one. And I think these are decisions that should be made by the American people through their elected representatives, not through one company making a business decision on behalf of all of us.
Well, I hope as we unpack these difficult and complex questions that the FBI will work with my office, because my community is deeply vested in these questions now, because we've seen the impact, and now as we see the involvement of international terrorist organizations claiming credit, we're even more interested to ensure that those who are killing and maiming my constituents are held accountable. I thank the chair, and I yield back.
Director, thank you for being here. Thank you for your leadership of those 37,000 people you talked about who are busting their tail every day to help protect all of us in this country. We do appreciate that, and I appreciate your comments about Mr. Horowitz's report saying it was unacceptable, but I'm a little concerned because it didn't seem to me that you had quite the same outrage in your response letter to Inspector General Horowitz. December 6, 2019, you wrote a letter. It's the last few pages of Mr. Horowitz's report. In the third sentence of that letter, you said this: the report's findings and recommendations represent constructive criticism that will make us stronger as an organization. Constructive criticism that will make us stronger. Director, you know what we all know. On July 31st, 2016, the FBI opened an investigation, spied on 4 American citizens associated with the presidential campaign. The FBI went to the FISA court and lied to the court 17 times. The FBI took the dossier, the now famous dossier, to the FISA court and didn't tell the court. You just talked about candor to the court. They didn't tell the court the guy who wrote it was desperate, had communicated to the Justice Department he was desperate to stop Trump. Didn't tell the guy who wrote it, Mr. Steele, was paid by the Clinton campaign to put the document together. And when all that's pointed out to you in a 400-page report, you say, thanks for the constructive criticism. 400-page report that says there were 51 assertions the top people at the FBI made to the court that weren't backed up, that weren't supported at all, and it's called constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is when your grade school teacher tells you study more for the spelling test. Constructive criticism is when one of my colleagues says, hey, Jim, you should have asked your questions different last week in a hearing. That's constructive criticism. Here's what Mr. Horowitz said. Here's what the Inspector General said. So many basic and fundamental errors were made by 3 separate hand-picked teams on one of the most sensitive FBI investigations that was briefed to the highest levels in the FBI. Maybe more importantly, here's what Judge Collier wrote. She said this in her public order: the frequency with which representations made by FBI personnel turned out to be unsupported or contradicted by information in their possession, and with which they withheld information detrimental to their case, calls into question whether information contained in other FBI applications is reliable. Put that in plain English, that's they gave so much wrong information here. How are we supposed to trust any other representations made to the court? Even Jim Comey on December 17th said something I never thought I'd hear Jim Comey say. He said, I was wrong. We were overconfident. So I'm a little concerned. I appreciate what you're saying today, that this is unacceptable. I appreciate what you said a little just to Mr. Gomer's questions about candor to the court. But that's not, I mean, what took place in this report is way past constructive criticism. This was a major royal screw up. This is way past constructive criticism.
I'm sorry, is there a question?
There is.
What's the question?
I'm concerned you're not taking this seriously enough. Are you taking it seriously enough, Director Wray?
I think I have demonstrated unambiguously that I take this very seriously. At the same time that the letter that you read occurred, I communicated in no uncertain terms to my leadership team and to the entire FBI workforce that I consider the Inspector General's report to have described conduct that I consider unacceptable.
So it was more than
unacceptable and unrepresentative of who we are as an institution.
Why didn't you write that? Why didn't you write that in the initial? This is the first. It's the last 10 pages of this report.
I addressed the letter because I think the letter, I think, to me,
let me point out
describes the. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Let me just point out one of the things you said. One of the recommendations that Mr. Horowitz says is if you're going to do a headquarters special, if you're going to pull this from the field offices, run an investigation out of the headquarters on a sensitive investigative matter, he said you should have some proper protocols in place, some checks and balances. And you said, we accept this recommendation. We got to be careful about doing these headquarters specials, which is what the mid-year exam was, what Crossfire Hurricane was. It was run by the top people at the FBI. And as you rightly say, they're all gone. But one of the recommendations that you say you're going to do to deal with this concern, you said we're going to require FBI Deputy Director approval prior to opening any FBI headquarters sensitive investigative matter. Well, Shazam, that you know what that means? That means Andy McCabe had to sign off on it. Well, isn't that how we got here to begin with? Andy McCabe has to sign off on it, so now the Deputy Director has to sign off on it if you're going to run an investigation out of headquarters and pull it from the field office? Is that really going to solve this problem?
That's not the complete recommendation or
I'm reading
corrective
it right
action.
here.
No, let me, if I may.
I'm
Sorry,
reading
go
it.
ahead.
I'm just reading what you wrote, requiring FBI Deputy Director approval prior to opening any FBI headquarters sensitive investigative matter.
The corrective action that we put in place on that particular issue involved a number of things. One, to communicate to the field that only in the rarest of circumstances, which was not communicated before, should any investigation, sensitive investigation, be conducted out of headquarters. One. Two, that in addition to requiring Deputy Director sign-off for those rare circumstances where that strong presumption would be rebutted, that it not only required sign-off by the Deputy Director, but also by the affected field offices. And that's a difference. That's what's different. So you couldn't have some small group of people at headquarters making the determination that, oh, that this is an exception. Now, the field offices that would otherwise be the presumptive offices to run those investigations, their leadership have to be involved in the discussion so that people can make sure that any decision to do this.
Who makes the final?
Gentleman's time has expired.